For more than 2,000 years, there's been one story that has just completely haunted Western philosophy. It's a story about shadows, about sunlight, and about the very nature of reality itself. So, let's dive into this incredible idea from Plato, the allegory of the cave, and see how it's still making waves today.
This question, right here, is the whole ballgame. Plato isn't just telling us some spooky story, he's inviting us into a thought experiment. It's one that really forces you to question everything you think you know about the world, everything you see, hear, and touch.
All right, so let's start where Plato starts, deep inside a strange, dark prison where reality is absolutely not what it seems.
I want you to picture this. You've got these people who have been chained up in a cave their entire lives. They can't even turn their heads. The only thing they can possibly see is the flat wall right in front of them. Now behind them there's a big fire burning, and between the prisoners and that fire, puppeteers are walking back and forth holding up different objects. The fire throws the shadows of those objects onto the wall, and for the prisoners, those flickering shadows aren't just shadows. They are everything. They are the only reality they have ever known.
And this quote just hits the nail on the head. As Plato says, their whole idea of truth is built on these projections. They'd give the shadows names, they'd talk about them, they'd probably even argue about which one is going to show up next. All the while, they have no idea they're just looking at copies of copies. It's kind of like they're living inside a movie, totally convinced that the screen is the entire universe.
So, what happens if one of these prisoners is suddenly set free? Well, Plato is really clear about this. The journey to the truth isn't some walk in the park. It's painful. First, he's forced to turn around and look at the fire, and the light is agonizing to his eyes. Then, he gets dragged, probably kicking and screaming, up this steep, rough path out of the cave and into the blinding sunlight. He can't see a thing. It's a really slow process. At first, he can only make out shadows, then maybe reflections in the water. It's only after his eyes have had a long time to adjust that he can finally look at the sun itself and understand, wow, that is the source of everything.
But this is where the story takes a really tragic turn. The enlightened prisoner, he goes back into the cave to tell everyone what he's found. But his eyes are used to the light now, so he can't see in the dark anymore. The other prisoners, they just laugh at him. They mock him. They think the journey has completely ruined him, made him crazy. They decide it's way better to just stay in the dark. And in fact, Plato says they would literally kill anyone who tried to drag them out into the light.
Okay, so what does this bizarre story actually mean? I mean, is it just a creepy tale? Not at all. The cave is a massive metaphor for Plato's single most important idea, his theory of forms. Here's the core idea. Plato argued that the world we experience with our senses, the physical world, is just like those shadows on the cave wall. It's not the real deal. True reality, he said, exists in this other, intellectual place, a realm of perfect, eternal, unchanging concepts that he called forms. So think of it like this. Every beautiful thing you've ever seen is just an imperfect, temporary copy, a shadow, of the one, perfect, eternal form of beauty itself. So this basically sets up a picture of two different worlds, as you can see right here. On one side, you've got the visible world, which is the cave. That's the world we see and touch, and Plato calls it a prison house full of flawed copies. But on the other side, you've got the intelligible world, the world outside the cave. That's the true reality of the forms, and you can only get there through philosophy and reason. So, that journey out of the cave, that's the soul climbing out of the world of mere opinions and into the world of true knowledge.
And the sun. What about the sun, the last thing the prisoner sees? Well, for Plato, the sun is the biggest deal of all. It represents the highest form, the form of the good. Just like our sun in the sky makes it possible to see everything and for life to exist, the form of the good is what makes all the other forms, and therefore all truth and all reality, understandable. It is the ultimate source of, well, everything.
But, and this is a huge but, not everyone was convinced. In fact, Plato's greatest student came up with one of the most powerful challenges to his teacher's entire theory. And this is what makes it so incredible. We're talking about Aristotle. This wasn't some random critic. This was Plato's star pupil who studied under him for 2 decades. He knew the theory of forms inside and out, better than almost anyone. And yet, at the end of the day, he rejected it by asking some really, really tough questions.
Aristotle's whole critique really kicks off with a simple but absolutely devastating question. If a man is a man because he resembles the perfect form of man, then what is it that explains that resemblance?
Okay, stick with me here, because this leads to what we now call the third man argument. If you need something to explain the similarity between a regular man and the form of man, well, you'd need a third form of man that they both look like. But wait, now you need a fourth form to explain how the first three are all similar, and then a fifth and a sixth. You see the problem? It just goes on and on forever. It's an infinite regress, which means the theory doesn't actually explain anything at all. But here is the most amazing part of this whole debate. Plato wasn't clueless about this problem. In what has to be one of the most incredible displays of intellectual honesty ever, he actually brought up this exact objection against his own theory in one of his later writings. He knew it was a potential flaw, which just goes to show you how deeply he was willing to question his own greatest ideas. Now, despite these powerful challenges, Plato's ideas were just too compelling to disappear. In fact, they found a brand new and incredibly powerful life centuries later inside a religion that was taking over the world, Christianity. So you have these hugely influential early Christian thinkers, guys like St. Augustine, who start reading Plato and are just stunned. They see these unbelievable parallels between Plato's world of forms and the divine, eternal reality described in the Christian faith. To them, it was like Plato was a guy who, just by using his brain, had gotten so close to the truth.
But it wasn't a perfect fit, not by a long shot. Christianity really adapted and transformed Plato's ideas. So while Plato thought the soul was eternal and existed before the body, Christianity said, no, the soul is created by God. And here's the big one. Where Plato saw the body as a prison you needed to escape, Christianity saw it as a gift from God, something that was destined for resurrection. So salvation wasn't something you achieved with your intellect, it was something you received through God's grace.
The single biggest game changer was the incarnation, the Christian belief that God himself, the ultimate, eternal, perfect reality, became flesh in Jesus Christ. That was a radical break from Plato. It gave the physical world and the human body a kind of dignity and importance that was just completely alien to Plato's whole way of thinking.
And this brings us to a final, really powerful comparison: the deaths of Plato's hero, Socrates, and the central figure of Christianity, Jesus. You're looking at two of the most influential deaths in all of Western history.
On the surface, the similarities are just uncanny. Both were condemned to death by the state, both had chances to escape and refused, both died surrounded by their followers, and both of their deaths launched movements that would completely reshape the world.
But then you look closer and the differences are just staggering. Socrates dies calmly, with total philosophical composure, even arguing with his friends. He welcomes death as the final release of his soul from the prison of his body. His death is a demonstration. Christ, on the other hand, dies in agony, praying and crying out in anguish. His death isn't a demonstration, it's a sacrifice. He doesn't just welcome death, he submits to it, in order to conquer it with the resurrection.
And that leaves us with one final fascinating question to just chew on. For a philosopher like Socrates, who spent his entire life arguing that the body was a jail cell for the soul, what could possibly be more horrifying than the idea of being put back into that body, even a perfect one, for all eternity? It's a question that really gets to the heart of the deep, unbridgeable gap between these two traditions that have shaped our world.